Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Career Week. My name is Christine Kunkel. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Events and Professional Programs at the University of Maryland Alumni Association. We are so excited you're able to join us for today's session, Approach the Bench, Terp Attorney Sidebar Conversations. This event is brought to you by the Alumni Association's inaugural Career Week, which is a week-long virtual series to help alumni conquer, steer, and advance their careers. We have a dynamic panel of Terp attorneys with us today who will share their expertise and advice. The first half of our program will be moderated discussion led by Matt Johnston, who has maintained a virtual law office since 2012. Please submit your questions for our panelists using the chat box located at the bottom of the Zoom panel. Please note that this session will be recorded. If you do not wish to appear, please just turn off your camera. Following our moderated discussion, we'll turn off the recording and move into breakout rooms for small group discussions facilitated by our panelists. And now I am so pleased to introduce you all to Matt Johnston. He is an attorney and the founder of Johnston Business Law Group in Frederick, Maryland, where his practice focuses on establishing and advising small businesses on operations, employment law, trademarks, copyrights, and business contracts. He is also the co-owner of Jammy Jams, a music company that creates lullaby music by using popular music as the source material. Matt is a 2005 cum laude graduate of the Columbus School of Law at the Catholic University of America and a 1997 cum laude graduate of the University of Maryland with a bachelor's degree in government and politics. Now let's get started. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Christine. Well, Christine gave me the sort of the rundown. The panel that we have is kind of an interesting mix. So I'm going to turn it over to each individual panelist to give a quick rundown of who they are, where they are, what kind of practice they engage in. So I guess we'll start with Marty Goldberg first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marty Goldberg. I'll start off with my connections to the University of Maryland. I graduated undergrad in 1984. Grew up in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. After graduating from Maryland, I went to Georgetown Law School and then came down to South Florida to clerk for a federal judge. Then became a federal prosecutor for a number of years in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I started my own firm about 25 years ago. And today our firm is a litigation firm. We have about 30 lawyers, offices in South Florida up through Tampa. And we focus on complex commercial litigation, a good bit of healthcare, white collar criminal defense, and everything in between. So it's a litigation shop, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So thank you, Matt.
Mr. Gary Kaufman.
Hey everyone, I'm happy to see some of my New York Terps up on the screen, New York lawyers. I'm Gary Kaufman. I graduated Maryland in 2003. I'm originally from New Jersey, but I live in, my office is in Manhattan in New York. I live in Brooklyn, and I've been up here since I went to law school at Cardozo in 2003 from 2006. After law school, I took a one-year hiatus. I was down in Florida, in Orlando. I was a public defender down there, followed by doing public defense for the next 6 years. I'm in New York, both in Staten Island and in Manhattan for the Neighborhood Defender Service, Harlem. And then in 2013, I started my own practice doing criminal defense, both state and federal. I'm on the 18B panel, which is court-appointed state work, and the CJA panel, which is court-appointed federal work. In New York, in addition to private practice, in addition to criminal law, I also do other forms of discipline, namely educational discipline, where I represent students, expulsion, and the like. I am a member of the New York Terps Alumni Board, and a couple years ago founded New York Terps Attorneys Group, which will be having an event in late February if anybody is interested.
Thanks, Gary. And finally, Matthew Glinsman.
Hi, folks. Nice to see you guys. I'm a Terp. My wife is a Terp. We are both attorneys. and we established our law firm in 1995, so we're about 26 years now. We are an immigration firm. We have just us two attorneys. We work in a historic building in Gaithersburg, and we have 7 staff. And so we definitely had to deal with, how to work with staff and readjust to the pandemic. Because we're an immigration firm, we do all affirmative cases: citizenship, green cards for family and employees, temporary work visas, company transferees, naturalization, citizenship. Looking forward to the panel.
Thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Just to give everybody a quick rundown, I'm going to talk a few minutes about having been in virtual learning. I've been a virtual attorney since 2012, since I founded my own firm. For the most part, all of us have probably adapted to some level or another of remote work or virtual attorneying, virtual lawyering. I just wanted to give some sort of insights. I didn't prepare a slide deck or anything like that. As I told the panel earlier, I'm recording a whole bunch of stuff next week for the Small Business Development Center. And so they have to have slide decks. So that's where my attention has been on that. So when I went out on my own, I'd been with a litigation firm for a number of years. I decided to go out on my own, and I specifically set up shop as a virtual attorney. So what virtual attorney means to me, and it means a little bit something different, I think, probably to all of the panelists, is I have no fixed practice spot. I don't have an office. I do work primarily out of a co-working space in Frederick, which allows me to, I pay a monthly fee, but then I don't have to pay extra for things like electricity or internet or things like that. So it's a relatively low monthly fee. But I also pre-pandemic, I used to go to client offices pretty regularly. Sometimes I would work in their office for half a day. Sometimes it would just be a meeting. So I enjoyed that. So no fixed sort of location. And I probably would imagine that most of my co-panelists would agree that if you're going to be operating in a way that is virtual or remote, you have to have a really, really good communication system. Now I have to primarily communicate with clients, but I do have 2 staff. They're both part-time. They're both remote. One is in New York in Ithaca, and the other is in Durham, North Carolina. So it does require a very robust communication system. Our practice management software that I use allows us to communicate internally. There's a chat function in the software. There's also a pretty decent, robust messaging system that's internal. And then we use, of course, everybody's been using Zoom. We've been using Zoom and Skype and Google. For a while, we were using Google Meetings, but I'm not a big fan of Google Meetings security. So we never use that for clients. So a lot of the functionality for the communications was always driven by 1, security, and 2, convenience. And yes, I know Zoom isn't great. And believe it or not, while we use Zoom, communications with clients is old school sometimes, and we actually use the phone. So believe it or not, the phone exists and it works. I know that's like, 1950s technology and stuff, but it was pretty useful, and we sort of function that way. The other hard part that I faced when I was setting up a virtual practice was hardware and software for me and my staff. I literally operate out of 1 laptop. I have a printer at home. It's all-in-one, so it scans, faxes, copies, all of that. Although I can't remember the last time I sent a fax. And then I have a backup laptop. So just sort of I learned that lesson the hard way about 2 years ago when the screen on my then laptop died and I couldn't see anything, although I knew my computer was operating. It turns out that the video card went bad, so I couldn't even plug in a remote, another monitor. So I learned that lesson the hard way. And then I purchased laptops for the staff members. So that way I can control what security is on it. And I outsource the management of that. And then software, we use a practice management software that probably a lot of people use one form or another. The software that I use is called MyCase. I purchased it because it matched pretty closely to how I operated, and there was no great secret behind it. And then, the nice thing about it is it integrates with my QuickBooks. It allows me to do all of the things that I need a software to do. But I also have a very old school mechanism for my task management, which is the all important sticky note. I carry them around and I keep them in my notebook, and that's how I keep track of things. Yes, the software has a task management system, but my daily work is driven by those sticky notes. So it's very old school. And then the other thing that we do, and I spend a lot of time working on is, and it's something that I think every virtual lawyer has to have, is your processes. That I know Matthew, there's a very specific sort of system for what immigration lawyers do, because one of my best friends is an immigration lawyer. So they have very sort of set procedures and set processes, and a lot of the work that I do has very similar sort of things. When I'm doing trademark, there's a very specific thing. And I come from having been in the Navy, and everything in the Navy is on a checklist. And when I say everything, from stem to stern on a boat, on a ship, is subject to some sort of maintenance, and all of that maintenance is on a checklist. Everything. So I really do work those checklists. And I think that is, at the end of the day, the lifeblood. So I don't know about Gary, and I'm going to come to Gary in just a second, but when I draft something, because my staff is part-time, they often work in the evening, which is fine for the work that they need to do. But I need somebody to proofread my work. So I actually pay for two products. I pay for a fairly standard Grammarly item, the Grammarly subscription, which is really good. And then I use a system called Perfected. They look at different kinds of things, some similarities, some different things. But the hardest part about being a virtual lawyer is because everything is about your written communication, making sure you don't have dumb typos, making sure you've got your citations correct, making sure that everything's formatted right, and you're consistent. That's why I ended up using both systems, because very early on, I didn't even have staff. It was literally just me. And so I didn't have the opportunity to have somebody reviewing a contract and making sure everything was spelled right and punctuated right. Or in the very, very rare occasions that I have to go to court, I didn't want a motion or something like that to be undermined by typos and bad citations and things like that. So when you're operating solo, when you're operating virtually, your communications and your written communications takes such a high priority that you really cannot overlook the damage that a typo can have. And then primarily the other thing that we deal with is, I have to communicate with clients just like all of us. So I also didn't want to spend all day responding to emails. So, and then some of our emails are very sort of formulaic. So I use a couple of tools called Text Expander. It's it's a company called Smith.ai, but Text Expander allows me to pre-write snippets. So I can use those snippets in a variety of different things. So for example, when a trademark application is working its way through the process, there's all kinds of confirmation emails from the trademark office of various steps. And we forward those on to the clients to let them know where the status is. And we just use the same, myself, Kelly, who handles a lot of the trademark administrative stuff. We use the same language, and it's pre-recorded. We share it. You just click a couple of keys and it populates in. It saves an enormous amount of time. I've also started using it for things like helping put together employee handbooks, contract templates, and clause libraries and things like that. The other tool that I use is something called Vidyard. Vidyard allows me to record short video messages and just send a video message. So if you think about if you write for 4 minutes, you might have a couple of hundred words. You could speak those couple of hundred words in about a minute. So it allows me to record the message, send out the message, and I know that they've both received the email and looked at the message because I get a notice that says they looked at the message. So those kinds of tools have helped me really with communications and to be responsive, to be quick, so I don't spend all of my time just responding to email. So I did want to point out at this, that's kind of my, the last thing I wanted to say is some practices lend themselves quite well to virtual. My practice does. I don't go to court a lot. The most common court matter that I have is a collection suit. Every once in a while, a client will get sued by somebody, and sometimes I'll handle it, and sometimes I will bring in outside counsel, largely because it's just me as an attorney, and sometimes litigation takes up more time than I want to devote to a particular case. So not every practice is set up to work well virtually. So if you have questions about virtual stuff, please use the chat. We're here. We're gonna try and answer as many questions as we can get to. I do want to turn it over to Gary, because Gary is, as a criminal defense, he's spending a not insignificant time in court. And just to give an idea of what that looked like, that shift from, you were telling in the pre-meeting, literally a trial that spanned the non-pandemic to pandemic. So what did that look like for you, Gary?
Right. So and this is one of those things that your geographic location is different, right? Largely how serious the government took the pandemic where you are, and what attempts were made to shut down, to stay virtual, to try cases, as this has continued, So what's interesting is I was on a very long trial in the Eastern District of New York when the pandemic came. I started this trial on February 2nd or 3rd, whatever the Monday was, and I ended it on March 18th, which was 2 days after the state courts had shut. There's actually an article about our trial in New York Newsday, because we were the last trial on Long Island, I believe the last in New York State. It was the Eastern District's Central Islip Courthouse. It was a unique time because in addition to being on trial, I live in Brooklyn, and I was living out of a hotel during the week. I would come home 36 hours on the weekend, repack up, go back out to the hotel on the other side of the parking lot from the courthouse during the week, as we were on trial, a really intense securities fraud case. That trial then ended on the 18th of March, which is an interesting issue too, because the jury, I think, was clearly rushed, and we now have a motion pending for a new trial because we're saying there's no way that our client was denied his right, the Sixth Amendment right to an impartial and competent jury, as they were rushing to get out of there as the pandemic was sort of raging everywhere. I then came home. I went to the office for 1 day, grabbed everything I could, and brought it home. And for the beginning, the state courts basically shut down. Everything was just getting administratively adjourned in the beginning, except for arraignments. New arrests were still happening, although at a lower clip. And up until the protests and then the large number of arrests in the sort of in the early summer and late spring. So what happened, is those cases were simply being administratively adjourned in the state courts, except there would be times where if as the pandemic was raging in the jails, they would take applications for, emergency applications. You would have to put it in and hopefully get a date in an emergency virtual part a week or so later. Arraignments shifted after about 2 weeks to a completely virtual, which is hard to build a relationship with a client. They're in a pen. They're seeing a screen with you, and I do a good amount of court-appointed work in addition to private work, so that's happening that way. And that happened until really the late spring when we started having slightly more virtual court. Federal courts never stopped. And I guess Marty will probably talk about this, at least I assume it's the same in Florida. Federal courts never stopped, trials stopped, but we started doing phone conferences for court as opposed to video. And then by early July, I had a long sentencing proceeding via WebEx in the Eastern District of New York in federal court. State courts started, having a little more virtual practice as we headed towards summer. And by July, they wanted to start opening up in person a little bit more. And in August, September, that started happening a little bit in federal court as well. And that continued to the point where both began to start to try to do, grand juries came back in August, and that in state court, July in federal court. And then as they, came to November and late October, they started to try to introduce trials. And then the numbers spiked and they shut everything back down again. But now we're at least in a place where all the court appearances are happening. There are no more administrative adjournments for the vast majority of everything aside from like summonses, but they're happening virtually. They're happening through Microsoft Teams in the New York state courts, and then through the phone and WebEx in the federal courts in New York. And I do some New Jersey practice as well. And New Jersey has tried to do some bench trials in the municipal courts through the virtual method. I have significant issue with trials through this medium. I think there are real constitutional implications to that. And I do believe, this is a topic for another conversation, that lawyers should be fighting back against that, certainly defense lawyers. But that's what the practice has been like, and so, I've been I tried to work from home. I have little kids, it's been very difficult, and I've been in a small apartment for a little while as we were working on construction on a new house, which we're moving into tomorrow. And I'm coming to the office, I was coming to the office a lot from September to November. I started going less. I'm here today because I was in person and virtual today, because there are still now, some things have to happen in person, and they still are. So I had a virtual appearance at 11:45. I clicked out at 11:55, ran over to the courthouse, just 2 blocks from my office in Manhattan, and Manhattan Supreme, and did a case there, and I came back here at 1. So it's been kind of a wild ride, but we're doing it.
Marty, what's been your experience like? I mean, Florida, is Florida, and South Florida is always kind of interesting. But I want to get both your take on sort of court appearances and how that's working, but also you work with a much larger firm. You got a lot more lawyers, a lot more staff. What was it like to transition into a virtual practice with that many bodies, on staff?
Sure, great question. It was difficult, but I think we've done it well. And my overall answer is, I think the practice of law has done well through the pandemic, at least for litigators and in my genre. I think we had to go through 3 stages, and then I'll defer the rest of the time to Matthew, because I know we're running a little bit out of time. I'll be short. But to make that transition, Matt, we did really 3 things. We had to immediately, we're in 3 offices, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa. We have 30 lawyers. We had to immediately figure out how we're going to do it outside of our office, but still get the support for the lawyers who are at home. So we immediately beefed up our web-based capabilities. and our remote access, so that everybody was fully capable on all platforms at their houses. Concurrent with that, we had to beef up our security to make sure that we were free from, even hackers, and make sure all the firewalls were in and everybody who was working from home was secure. And then, since we do practice all around the country in all different courts, we had to get every court's security features down and understood, and make sure that we had access because the courts were having hearings daily. So we went through that whole process. And then I think the last thing that we did is we built this transportation network, quite frankly, going from our offices. And fortunately, we had some people who were, we made sure that they were safe and isolated and socially distant, but they would run from our offices, print out materials, do the notebooks, and then, run to each of the lawyers' offices to provide them with the materials, the notebooks for our hearings and trials and so forth. So we quickly, had to adapt to the practice of law with everybody being at home. I have not brought anybody back in any of 3 offices since March. I don't expect that to occur until late summer this year. So that's really the process we went through. Unfortunately, it's gone pretty well. And I'll just defer the rest of the time to Matthew.
Thank you, Marty. So when the pandemic came, we had a mix of server, matter management, as well as some, online cloud type programs. We have, since we have about almost 10 of us, it was about, all right, so they were all working in the office. How do we keep them socially distanced and all that? The first weekend where it shut down, I basically came in and I went to my basement and pulled out all of our old desktops, switched out SSD drives for them so they'd be updated a little bit, and made them basically remote terminals into people's desks. So people still could access that network. And now sort of phase 2 of this for us is certainly moving more to the cloud and utilizing more of there's so much technology exploding around this, the practice of law and communicating and all that. We're in the process of doing a major evaluation to try to find programs that will combine a lot of things. The key goals for us, keeping our staff and our clients focused and productive, and motivated. That was easier for the staff. I think, I think early on, not everyone had a video camera, and we got video cameras for everyone's system, and so we can actually interact. We got of course we did Zoom, but we really are encouraging clients to have that video interaction as opposed to sort of it being an email relationship. It's really trying to maintain that close relationship with our clients. The other challenge we had is that we had how do we collect, sign, review documents? We were very physical file dominated. My staff would come in, we would review the file together and make corrections and all that. And now we're still adapting, but we've made quite a lot of headway on how do we sort of now prepare cases in a more of a virtual. And so basically we review documents with our clients with document sharing and make corrections and everything. We are all participating. It actually, in many ways, is a little bit better than that. And engaging clients, we're just trying to keep them focused. And one of the reasons I like video conferencing is suddenly my meetings are starting on time, and some things like that have been really good. We're in that process of moving all to more of a cloud-based systems. The only other thing we did is we separated our days. So my team, so I work with my wife, we each have teams, right? And so my team, we have one person that already operates out of Argentina, answering our phones and managing client and collecting information. And so we were already set up with voice over IP and VPN access and all that. So because that had already existed, it allowed us to implement that very easily. But we basically alternate days. And we created the ability to do drive-by signing, notary, and scanning of documents. So during the warm months, we actually had a window to an outside desk that met up with our conference room. So we would actually not have them in the office, but we have big plexiglass dividers and water air filtration when we need it. Right now, at this particular time, almost no meetings. We updated our FedEx account to get better pricing, and now it's $7 for a 2-day express. And that's cheaper than having them to come to the office and drink our coffee. So it's fine. So anyway, we've been doing okay, but it's definitely a work in progress. And finding those cloud-based tools has been really important for us.
We got a question, and this is kind of a fun question from Karen. Are there any aspects of your practice? Are you going to keep any of your aspects of your practice remote more permanently? I know for me, the answer is yes, because that's always been my business model. But in particular, I'd like to hear from Marty, because you are not just distributed across a remote workforce, but your firm was already in multiple cities. So just curious about that.
Yeah, I think the answer is I'm going to try my best, because I think that the practice law is going to change permanently because of this, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that we retain some of the benefits. And there's a couple. I mean, there's a lot, but I'll mention a few. One, when you have a litigation firm like I do and a lot of lawyers, you're traveling a lot in the pre-pandemic world, getting on planes, going to hotels, traveling different cities around the United States for single events, whether it be a deposition or a hearing, etc. What we've been able to do in this world is really unparalleled. It's quite frankly incredible. I've been amazed at being able to get up in the morning, have a hearing in Nashville in the morning, have a hearing in Dallas later that day, and then the end of the day have another hearing before a judge in New Haven. That was just a couple weeks ago, without having to get on one plane, spend one night in a hotel, and at the end of the day, I'm at home able to spend it with my family. So, and I think the cost efficiency also helps the client as well. So I'm hopeful that we can keep a remote environment for efficiency's sake as much as we can.
Gary, what about you? Do you think there's going to be more time that you're going to work from home, or is it still going to be, I have very young kids, so I'm going to get out of the house as quickly as I can?
Yeah, so it's funny that it's more a function of where I am in my life than where I am in my practice, in that I cannot wait for this to be over. I cannot wait to be over for many reasons, but professionally as well. It has been, like Marty's saying, it's been, as a solo who's in court, I'm in court 13 out of every 15 days. Often it's sometimes as someone who practices in state and federal court and in multiple boroughs and in New York and New Jersey, I am at times running around, and trying to get from one court appearance to the next, and spending a lot of time on the subway. So it's been a lot easier to do court appearances in multiple locations, and I have really liked that. However, I do miss being in a real courtroom. I don't miss the sitting around and waiting in the state court. Having a time is great. Like in federal court, it's much easier. But I am not gonna, working from home is very difficult. I have little kids. I have a first grader and a fourth grader. And I'm just more productive in the office. I also have found one of the difficulties, and I don't want to take too much time, but one of the difficulties is closing business in this world. Someone would call, and I'd have a brief conversation, get them into the office, look them in the face, let them see me, and then sort of form that relationship. And often they would, sign a retainer agreement while they're in my office. Having that in the virtual world, I found to be much, much more difficult. Especially because in my line of work, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. A lot of my clients like to pay cash, and that is, difficult to do in the virtual world as well. So it's just been, I think there is very little that I will keep of this. I've switched before this. I already went to an eFax account and some of the other things that I could do sort of virtually. But, I think I look forward to going back to practice as much as in my line of work, it'll be more like it was than probably any other line of this profession.
Matthew, you practice largely before a federal administrative body. So what has been, are there going to be aspects that are going to change as a result of all of this, practicing before a federal body?
Yeah, so, they just shut down all of the hearings for the most part. And under the previous administration, they weren't really, eager to push that along. And plus, they needed to protect their workforces and everything else. So certain cases we have to be there in person for. Currently, there is no option with Immigration Service, USCIS, and other agencies in those regards to have a virtual. Now, they've offered it. But knowing from experience, honestly, I don't know about you with a criminal, Gary, a criminal defendant, being in the room with the client instead of having the client in the room without you is huge. So I would never have my client go on their own. And I wouldn't, and I know from some little experience where they would put us in different rooms and do video conferencing between rooms to try to keep separation at the government offices, that, there's just too much of a disjoint still in that process. And I don't foresee that. So I think we're going to, eventually we'll be back in the government offices. I think that's the one thing that is definitely going to stay. I think for everything else, we can maybe do with one meeting and then have other ones virtual. I do believe in the client sort of face-to-face sort of building value, and they really, I think your clients get a much more good sense of confidence in you and more vested in you as their guide through this process. If you can do it in person, but we're trying where we can with video.
I will say just one thing in my line of work, a significant positive of this, is the negative is people are sitting in jail for a really long time. Positive is the DAs and the AUSAs are facing massive backlogs. And, with no grand juries or minimal grand juries, their caseloads are just backing up, and the trials are now going to be backed up for a year by the time they reopen or longer. And it is a good time right now to make a deal. And I don't know if that's the case civilly, if sort of this, if that's, I could see it having the opposite effect in the civil realm where oh, nothing's happening, so we don't have to push. But in the criminal realm, I am getting offers I have never gotten right now and will never get again,
I know Christine is listening in. There was a question, Christine, about the attendee list. I think that list is going to go out, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. I will say from a remote sort of work, just based upon my clients and some of my clientele, there's going to be a lot of office space that's going to be available for really cheap in the next few years. A couple of my clients they lease commercial spaces, they're commercial landlords. And so there is, that kind of interesting thing that's going to be available. I don't know about Marty's rent situation, but you know, a couple of places, a couple of my clients who have commercial spaces, they're already turning them into flex spaces, co-working spaces, where it'll be available for multiple sort of uses. We did get a question about what software do you use for case management, remote connectivity, cloud-based services, Evernote, things like that. So I use MyCase as my practice management software. I personally love it. I think MyCase probably wishes they would rescind their offer to put me on the beta test list. So I get to test all kinds of things and tell them how stupid they are, or why nobody actually operates that way. It's one of the problems of having technology guys are really, really good, but sometimes they don't think the same way that lawyers do. For remote connectivity, I use Zoom. I have a Zoom account, like probably everybody does now. But I run my email. My email runs through my practice management software, which I personally love. There are note functions within the software. I use Evernote, but I use that for when I'm generating marketing content. I don't really use anything like that. So what about you, Gary? You're another.
Yeah, so I use Leap for case management. That I use it largely for, I charge generally flat fees, but I do have to keep track of time as we're required to do under the ethical rules. So I use that for that purpose. I put all my cases into it. It does link up to QuickBooks. So I use Leap and I like it. I like it a lot, actually. For court, I use what they tell me to use. So it's WebEx in the federal system. It's Microsoft Teams in the state, but I prefer Zoom. And for speaking with clients and anything else, I generally would use Zoom. I have, my email runs through and G Suite, the Google Suite, and, I use that for some cloud, but I save most of my stuff to Microsoft OneDrive just because it's easier because I'm doing, most of my work in Word and it's just easy to back it up to OneDrive. So that's what I use for the cloud. That's basically what I use.
So before I get over to Marty and Matthew, being on the beta test team at MyCase, they actually implemented something that I really loved, and they just rolled it out. So I can open up a document, any Microsoft Office document, even Adobe documents, through the software, and when I save it on my desktop, like it automatically saves to the version in the MyCase, which I love. I get no benefit other than I get to roll out and test the new stuff. I don't get anything from MyCase about it. So Marty, you have a much larger practice. So what kind of software packages do you guys use?
For front office document management, we're converting to iManage, that product. For back office billing and accounting, we use ProLaw. And the rest of it is remote desktop and the same platforms for communication that Gary and everybody else has mentioned.
What about you, Matthew?
Yeah, so we still have a server-based matter management, Time Matters. We've been wanting to get rid of it forever, but this is really pushing it. And that's just tracking our contacts and everything. But we use the Microsoft Office 365 suite. And I think we're moving to something called Zola Suite, which allows for templating a lot of and workflow things. Because it's on the web, we can call and potentially text our clients. We can give our client reminders by text or email at various times. And it does have resident email as well. So we're looking at moving towards that, and then we'd have another immigration specific software, which no one needs to really care about, probably but me.
Matthew?
Yeah.
I use Zola Suite in my last firm. I would suggest you have them let you do a test drive of it before you commit to it. It's got a lot of glitches.
Okay. Yeah, I'm currently test driving it, actually.
Okay.
Who'd you end up with?
No, the firm, it's not my firm. It was before. Yeah, so
Got it. Okay.
firsthand user experience.
Got it.
I know Christine wants to start sending folks out to breakout rooms. And so we'll use the question that Lisa just put up there as sort of the key point for breakouts. What impact has the pandemic had on your marketing activity? So I think that's a good place to start when we get to the breakout rooms. And we'll let the mistress of ceremonies start kicking everybody out to the rooms.